Genshin's 3-star weapons are odd. Since they're the filler items you get when trying to acquire a 4 or 5 star, it's easy to just write them off as junk. That's what most people do, and I can't exactly blame them. Compared to their mightier siblings, 3 stars tend to have lower stats and do significantly less flashy things. But that doesn't mean they're not worth using. Far from it. If you know anything about me, you know I love using and abusing overlooked, underrated, and just suboptimal characters and playstyles in games. I mean, I have a max level Zinyan for crying out loud, and she's great. So I had the idea one day to look at this oft neglected group of weapons and try to find the best among them and see what value they can offer. Keep in mind, I'm not an expert in this game. I use wacky and weird builds, not whatever the flavor of the week meta suggests. Most of these aren't tested in super optimal environments with all the hottest characters, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Then again, they're 3 stars. If you're using them, it's probably for an off-meta funny build, and if so, mad respect to you. With that said, let's get into the ranking of 3-star weapons in Genshin Impact. We are not starting off on a strong note, I'm afraid. Kicking off the list is quite possibly the worst weapon in the game above 2 stars, the Traveler's Handy Sword. Despite what the name suggests, this thing is not handy at all. It manages to hit a double whammy by having a horrible subset and effect, and is the only thing on this list to do so. Let's start with that effect, as it'll be a recurring problem. Healing in Genshin is not hard to come by. You'll be running a healer in almost all of your parties, so getting a bit of health back from picking up a particle is completely redundant, and same goes for defeating an enemy when we get to those. Now, Def substat. Def is a really niche stat that not many characters actually want. There are only 2 swords to make any use of it, so it seems like it could be a half decent option on them, but still manages to be a complete letdown. The Traveler's Handy Sword gives by far the least defense of any weapon, so both the possible uses would be better off with pretty much anything else. The only thing you can see the Handy Sword being used for is a really weird Queequeg build, and maybe once I get here I'll try messing around with that. But until then, it'll sit at the bottom of the inventory gathering dust, as it should. The next ones are a weird bunch I'm grouping together, the Messenger and Halberd. These weapons both have great ideas, but are unfortunately outclassed by other 3 stars to do the exact same thing better. Let's start with the Messenger, since it's the more interesting of the two. I really like the concept of this bow. Whenever you hit an enemy's weak point, it'll deal an extra 200% attack as crit damage. Pair that with a crit damage subset, you've got a really simple yet effective idea to maximize weak point damage and reward good aim. It sounds awesome. What's the problem with it? Well, you can only get that extra damage once every 10 seconds. Yeah, that's not great. Considering how fast charge attack users like Tighnari are gonna be unleashing those things, it's a pretty big drawback. A shame since the idea's there. The Halberd is pretty similar. Big extra damage to normal attacks, but once every 10 seconds. I'd say the Messenger is slightly better, both because of the subset and because it's a more interesting idea. But like I said, both these are just outclassed by similar weapons we'll see further up the list, specifically the Sharpshooter's Oath and White Tassel. We'll see how well the ideas work when we get to those. We unfortunately now come to a stretch of rather uninteresting items. All of these are the sorts of things that probably come to mind when we think 3 stars. They are incredibly fine, but there are about a dozen better options to equip on anyone. The worst among these is the Twin Nephrite. Extra speed and damage when defeating a foe is kinda good for dealing with Hilichurls, but there are easier ways to achieve similar buffs, and it's completely irrelevant in boss fights. Not even a crit rate substat can save it, since it only boasts 16% at level 90, even the artifact substats can do better than that. Moving up a rung, we come to the Fairest Shadow, a greatsword with a neat idea that isn't executed fantastically. The Shadow will massively buff charge attacks, giving them a nice damage boost and increasing resistance. The downside is they have to be below a certain HP threshold. It's a really generous threshold though, just don't bring in any super good healers, and it's not hard to keep it in the zone. Now that you know what it does, try to guess its subset. Crit rate? Crit damage? Attack? Nope, it's HP. I guess to try to give you a larger window to gain its buff, but boy, it works so much better with crit. Anyways, rates for charge attack builds are weird and gimmicky, but if you want to try one, the Fairest Shadow is the best option for them that isn't Ito's 5-star. On the subject of Ito, the White Iron Greatsword is a weapon that's kinda good on him and Noelle and basically no one else. This thing is basically just a Traveler's Handy Sword, but 3 times larger. The HP restoring effect is still worthless, even more so on Noelle, but the Def subset is more helpful given the context. There are only 3 Greatswords who scale off defense, and Zinyan barely counts in that. Unlike the Handy Sword though, the White Iron actually gives a pretty respectable amount of defense. The Geo Greatsword squad can get some nice use out of the thing, but you won't have any reason to put it on anybody else. And completing the Claymore trio is by far the one with the most versatility, the Debate Club. For stars, the club has to have one of the best designs and names of any weapon in the game, let alone a 3-star. To counter that though, is one of the least interesting in gameplay. attack percent subset, and some extra damage on skills and normal attacks. And unlike the halberd, it only has a 3-second cooldown on that. It's not a bad option, and can work pretty well on basically any character, but it's also far from anyone's best in slot, and is basically a filler item to equip until you get something really worthwhile on them. It's like the most average weapon in the game. On the bright side, diamonds are now the above average weapons. Everything from this point up should have some good argument to be used. But not necessarily a super strong argument, as is the case with the otherworldly story. This one is supremely boring. The HP effect is as useless as ever, but it's got a respectable 39% ER subset, so you could run on some tome built entirely around their burst and get some mileage from it, but it's not spectacular. As boring as the item itself is, the arcade description is one of the best in the game. It's apparently a horribly written fantasy novel with absolutely no stakes and characters overpowered enough to solve any problem instantly. If only the weapon attached was as creative as the description. Now we get to another collective group, the Bane Trio. This group of miscreants consists of the Cool Seal, Raven Bow, and Blood-Tainted Greatsword. They all get lumped together thanks to their effects. Bane of whoever and whatever will like the wielder do increased damage to enemies affected by either of the two specified elements. Bane is the most pretty good effect in the game. It can be helpful, and it's definitely better to have than not to have, but it's nothing to get super excited over. The elements selected on each don't really matter, you just have to keep them in mind when building a character or team around them. The weapons can work pretty well, but there are better options, even in the 3-star selection. As for the order, it's entirely determined by substat. Cool Steel is the weakest with attack percent, followed by Ravenbow and Blood-Tainted, which both have EM. Blood-Tainted just has twice as much EM as Raven for some weird reason. I don't know why, but music can also work as a pretty good stat stick for someone like Kaveh. Finally, some of you may have noticed that the magic guide is in this group, despite also being a Bane, and you'll see why soon enough. Moving past those, we come to the weapons that can compete with 4 stars. They've got solid reasons to be equipped, and since they're much easier to find, might be able to outperform some 4 stars. That doesn't mean they're complex though, since next is the halberd's old friend, the White Tassel. This has to be one of the simplest items in the game. Crit rate substat, increased normal attack damage. Put it on some spear main DPS or a sub DPS who wants crit, and you're good. Yeah, not the most interesting item to talk about. The fillet blade is substantially better than it seems like it should. The sword has a 50% chance to deal a bunch of extra damage on attack, but it can only trigger once every 10 seconds, like the halberd and messenger. So what makes it so much better than those two? Well, the simple fact that damage triggers on any attack made by the user. This means you can equip it on basically any sword wielder. It'll just be a bit of extra damage when you hit someone, though you'd probably want on someone who can attack a lot, because of that 50% chance. Like the White Tassel, it's a simple weapon with a lot of versatility. Now we get to an even simpler one, the Recurve Bow. HP restoration is still useless, but the subset on this thing is nothing to scoff at, a whopping 47% HP. That is a huge amount. It makes the thing worth equipping on any HP based bow wielder. The only reason it's not higher is because there aren't actually very many of those. It's a great option on Diona, but other HP bows like Elan and Linny would probably prefer something that gives crit or EM. We will see the stats idea fully fleshed out a little bit later though. We then come to another pairing of similar weapons, the Black Iron Sword and Emerald Orb. These are weapons that will deal increased damage when triggering a reaction with a certain element, those being Electro and Hydro respectively. They're, again, really simple. Throw them on someone who matches the elemental type, like Ching or Kokomi, or build a team around someone triggering a reaction with that element, like Alhaitham for a Quicken team or Klee for a Vaporize team. They have a set role and do it really well. It's hard to say which is better though. Black Iron gives substantially more EM, but because of its strange scarcity, you can only get up to R2 right now, so the orb might outdamage it. I'm gonna put the Black Iron as the higher of the two though, solely because it's a really funny item to get and has one of the best descriptions in the game, but it could go either way. And the best way to follow up elemental based weapons is with the exact opposite, a physical weapon. The Skyrider Greatsword is the poor man's Snow Tomb Star Silver, but there are worse claymores to try to imitate. The main draw of this thing is the massive increase to physical damage. Physical Greatsword DPSs are fun as hell, and the Skyrider offers a nice and easy way to try them out without investing a belay. Its effect is just as good, giving the wielder a stacking damage buff every time they hit an enemy with a normal attack. Yeah, it's another pretty basic one. Not bad by any means, there's just not much more I can say about it. Luckily, from here on out, the weapons get more interesting. We finally get to the Messenger's upgrade, the Sharpshooter's Oath. It shares the crit damage subset with the Messenger, and the same concept of doing extra damage on weak points. The Oath trades off a large portion of the extra damage for the removal of the 10-second limit, making it perform substantially better. As stated earlier, charge attack characters like Linny, Tighnari, and Ganyu are generally built around firing off a bunch of charge attacks really fast, so having a 10-second cooldown is a huge hindrance, when combined with the higher crit damage it provides, and the weird calculations in the Messenger that make all the extra damage physical rather than elemental. There's a clear winner between the two. And now we return to the Banes with the odd one out from the group. The magic guide seems pretty similar to its contemporaries, and that's because it is. Bane of Storm and Tide is equal in value to the other ones, and it shares the massive 190 EM with the Blood-Tainted Greatsword. The difference is simple. It's a tome. Tomes inherently benefit from EM more than any other weapon since all their attacks are elemental, and while I said the selected elements don't matter that much, Electro and Hydro have some of the best reactions in the game tied to them. Freeze, Superconduct, Overloaded, and the good Dendro reactions. If only it was a really good EM scaling tome to make use of them. Despite being functionally the same as the other Bane weapons, the magic guide feels a lot more useful than the others in the group, since its wielders have more ways to make use of the tools it provides. Have you ever tried using a long-range weapon for close-range combat? Well, according to the Slingshot, it works pretty well. The Slingshot is a bow that's only as good as the wielder makes it. It does extra damage on attacks that connect within a third of a second of being shot, and deals less damage if they fly further than that. It's a lot of extra damage too, 60% is nothing to scoff at. While the Sharpshooter's Oath is an optimal pick for standing back and trying to carefully line precise shots, the Slingshot is good for anyone who just runs in mashing the attack button until things die. Tartaglia, Yoimiya, some really weird official build? Damn, I guess there aren't actually many bows for the playstyle. Even then, the subset of this thing opens up more possibilities. An extra 31% crit rate is huge. It makes the thing worth equipping on any sub-DPS bow. And while there aren't many characters that make use of the main effect at the moment, I expect there will be at least a few more down the line to use the Slingshot to its fullest effect. Alright, we've arrived at a very special group. A selection of 4 weapons with the power to rival the best of 4 stars, and even a few 5 stars. The best 3-star weapons have to offer, the viable 4. Kicking them off is an interesting pair that are so similar yet so different. But let's look at them one at a time, starting with the Harbinger of Dawn. Do you have a main or sub DPS sword? If so, you have a great user for this thing. The sword is incredibly simple in its design, but incredibly effective. Crit damage, crit rate. What more could a guy ask for? The Harbinger is just shy of an extra 50% crit damage with the subset, but will also grant a hefty 28% crit rate as long as the wielder is near full health. The crit stats are the most important ones for most DPS characters in Genshin, and there are not many weapons that grant both of them. Not to mention, the Harbinger grants the most of both respective stats for any sword below 5-star rarity. 90% HP is a tight threshold, but if you run the right support characters, any shield, you'll be able to use this fantastic blade to full effect. But the Harbinger is limited by one small thing. It's only good on DPS characters. It's really good on those characters, but what about our support buddies who don't want crit? Well, that's where the second half of this dynamic duo comes in, the Skyrider sword. The Skyrider is meant to be the 3-star sibling to the Favonius and Sack swords. Mainly, it's all about that ER. 51% is a lot, the most of any 3-star. And while it's not as much as its older siblings, it's nothing to scoff at either. Essentially, every support sword is going to want as much ER as humanly possible, and this thing is far from a bad choice for essentially all of them. The effect of the Skyrider is pretty weird. When the user activates their burst, they're getting a large boost in attack and, more notably, movement speed. Ignoring that second part for now, the extra attack sadly only applies to the wielder. This is probably for balance reasons to prevent a double to bless oblige from happening, but it can still be used well within limitations. Sub DPS stories with burst and scale attack basically just get a big damage boost, and there are more than a few solid characters who can use that. Add some less solid ones, but there's potential for funny stuff there. The main problem with the Skyrider sword comes from its fierce competition. The aforementioned Sacrificial and Favonius swords are 4-star weapons that can be obtained from standard wishing, and grant more ER than the Skyrider with arguably better effects. But as someone who played this game for 2.5 years before getting their first Sacrificial sword, having an easily accessible Skyrider is a nice boon sometimes. Also, go back to that move speed buff for a sec. When you build your team in just the right way with this thing, good lord can you move! The black tassel is an anomaly. At a glance, it seems like it should be at the bottom of the list, but thanks to a weird series of coincidences, it ends up being not only one of the best 3-stars, but genuinely one of the most useful weapons in the whole game. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The effect of this thing is a complete joke. Bonus damage to slimes is literally never helpful, not because you don't encounter slimes, because they are designed to be the weakest enemies in the game. Until they add a slime boss or something, the stat may as well not be there. But, back in the recurve bow section, I mentioned how some weapons are worth using solely because of their subset, and nothing exemplifies this better than the tassel. The spear boasts an HP percent subset, which is actually infinitely better than it sounds. For starters, the amount of HP this thing gives is utterly ridiculous. 47% is huge, being the 5th most of any HP granting weapon in the game, and more notably, the most of any spear, though the competition isn't all that fierce. There are only 2 other spears that grant HP, a forgeable thing that grants about half the health, and the newest event reward, but it's only available for limited time and still gives less HP than a tassel in exchange for a worthwhile effect. This means the tassel still has dominance over the HP scaling spears, and to the tassel's great benefit, there are a ton of those. It's an amazing option on Zhongli, but if you don't have him, it's a huge boon to Hu Tao's damage output. For a support role, it's great on Yao Yao, but if you have the heal spear on her instead, it's one of the best options for Bika, and Candace, and Chevreuse, and Toma depending on how you build him. The point is, there is always going to be somebody who wants this thing, and that alone, by definition, makes it extremely valuable to have. I love the Black Tassel. It is proof that you don't need flashy effects or paragraphs of text to be a great weapon. Sometimes all you need is a bunch of HP and a strong hatred towards slimes. But, as great as the Black Tassel is, I mean, come on, it can't be Thrilling Tales. I'm sure all of you are expecting this one at the top, and with good reason. Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers is a catalyst with a very simple design, but it accomplishes what it sets out to do extraordinarily well. When switching off a character with this tome equip, the character you switch to will have their attack increased by a ridiculous 48% for the next 10 seconds. For reference, that's over twice as much as a Noblesse Oblige, which is a solid contender for the best support artifact set in the game. Much like the Tassel, Thrilling Tales is an HP subset. It's not a lot of HP, but most health scaling tomes are support characters, so it ends up being one of their best weapons. There's really not much else to say about Thrilling Tales. It's a weapon where you can see why it's good from a glance. It's the #1 3-star without a doubt, and it represents the best of this overlooked group of oddities. The 3-star weapons are an interesting bunch overall. Not all of them are fantastic. A decent chunk of them are simple filler weapons you put on a character until you get some shiny weapon of a higher rarity, which has led to the assumption that all of them are like this, with 1 or 2 exceptions. I wanted to make this video to show there are more use for these weird overlooked misfits. A good bunch of them can be good side rates to the 4 and 5 stars, and so many of them have unique and interesting ideas in their designs. Plus, they all have a unique benefit over the other options. Availability. 3 stars are easy to come by en masse. You get tons of them from wishing and tons more for opening chests. In addition, they take less resources, XP, and more to level up than 4 and 5 stars do. They're designed to be easy to build. Considering what some of these things can do, and the fact that they're always going to be at R5, a lot of them can hold up really well compared to the real weapons. 3-star weapons are strange, off-meta, overlooked, and a ton of fun. Or, in other words, they're amazing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.